It was one of those stormy nights where thunder rolls endlessly and rain drums against the windows like impatient fingers. I've always loved nights like that. Something about the storm outside makes the warmth of home feel even more comforting. No work the next day meant I had every excuse to stay up late, curled up on the couch with a blanket, some hot coffee, and a good movie. I had just settled in, the dim glow of the TV flickering across the living room, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but local. Figuring it might be something important, I answered. "Hello." Silence. "Can I help you?" Still nothing. But the line wasn't dead. I could hear something, a soft static, layered with a faint patter, like rain. For a few seconds, I wondered if the call had picked up ambient sound from outside. It was eerie. Someone was definitely on the other end, but they weren't speaking. Feeling unsettled, I hung up. I brushed it off as a prank or a misdial, tossed the phone back on the table, and resumed the movie. But the quiet unease it left behind lingered. About an hour later, the storm kicked into overdrive. Thunder cracked hard enough to rattle the walls, and lightning flashed bright enough to silhouette the room. Then the power cut out. Everything went black. For a moment, the only sound was the furious rain and the growl of thunder overhead. I lit a candle I found in the kitchen drawer, something I hadn't touched in years, and made my way down to the basement to check the breaker box. Useless. The switch was limp and unresponsive. I flipped it a few times before giving up and returning upstairs. Outside the windows, the entire street was blanketed in darkness. Not the single house had power. I stood by the front window, just watching the storm rage for a while. The rhythm of the rain had become oddly hypnotic until I heard something. The distinct creak of the backyard gate swinging open. That gate never moves on its own. It doesn't even have a latch, but it's heavy enough that it stays shut unless someone pushes it. I moved cautiously toward the back door, peering out through the glass. Even through the curtain of rain, I saw some standing in my backyard. A tall figure, unmoving, just standing in the downpour. I couldn't make out his face or where he was looking. The lightning flickered behind him, turning him into a shadowy silhouette. Was he watching me, or staring off into the dark? I didn't know, and that made it worse. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, but the other part, the louder part, it told me to stay quiet. Anyone walking around in this storm, in the dead of night, wasn't out for a casual stroll. Then I saw him move, slowly, deliberately. He reached into his pocket and raised something to the side of his head. I saw the faint glow of a phone screen light up, and at that exact moment my phone started ringing in the other room. My blood ran cold. I ran to grab it. Same number, that same silent caller from earlier. I rushed back to the door, but he was gone, vanished into the darkness and rain. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, scanning the yard. Where had he gone? Was he still nearby? Watching? I didn't want to stick around by the door. I backed into the living room, unsure of what to do. Call the police? What would I even say? But then it rang again. Another call. I declined it. Bang. A heavy knock at the front door. Not a polite knock. A full-blown pounding, shaking the frame. The phone rang again. He kept knocking. Over and over. My walls trembled with each slam. I muted my phone, paralyzed. I know it sounds ridiculous, but fear had me in a chokehold. The storm, the blackout, the phone calls all blended into one nightmare. When the banging got even louder, almost violent, I finally snapped out of it and called 911. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hit the numbers. They told me an officer was close, just a few minutes away. I stayed on the line, whispering updates to the dispatcher. The knocking never stopped. Each slam against the door was like a drumbeat of panic. Eventually, I heard someone shouting outside. I peeked through the window and caught a glimpse of a police officer sprinting after someone chasing a dark figure into the storm. Then nothing, just the storm again. A couple minutes later, the officer returned, soaked and out of breath. He hadn't caught him. They took everything seriously, thankfully. The call log, the witness report, the officer's own sighting, they treated it like a real threat. But the number? It led nowhere. A burner, a dead end. Weeks have passed since that night. No more calls, no more knocks, just silence. But every time it rains now, I can't help but stare at that gate, watching, listening, wondering if the storm will bring him back. I wish I could tell you exactly when this happened, what year, what month, but honestly, I've tried hard to forget the details. What I do remember is the fear, not movie fear, Not fun, scary fear. I'm talking about real, heart-clenching terror, the kind you carry with you years later. I was in middle school then, just starting to get that false sense of maturity where you think you're too old to be scared. Summer had wrapped me in that teenage freedom, video games, junk food, and hours of doing nothing. That particular weekend felt like a jackpot. My parents were driving 8 hours away for a mini getaway, something about reliving their honeymoon. I didn't care. All I heard was no parents, no rules. I was going to have the house to myself, and naturally, I invited my best friend Finn over for a sleepover. There was just one hitch. Finn's parents were super strict. If they knew no adults would be there, he wouldn't be allowed within a mile of my house. So we lied, said my folks were home but upstairs, or something like that. Finn was in the clear. He wasn't going to show up until the evening, so I spent the first half of the day chilling and getting the house ready. Around noon, I cracked open the front windows to let in some breeze, and that's when I saw him. A man. Standing way too close to the house. Past the sidewalk, just near the garage. His hair was long and matted, and his beard patchy and unkempt. He was tall, lanky in a way that made him look stretched out. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. It put a knot in my gut. I pulled away from the window so he wouldn't see me watching. A few minutes later, I peeked again and he was gone. I didn't mention it to Finn when he arrived around 6. Why ruin the night over something that probably wasn't anything? We stocked up on chips and soda, locked ourselves in my room, and disappeared into video games for hours. Around 11:30 p.m., Finn left to use the bathroom. Not even a minute later, he came back with a weird look on his face. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I told him no, but before he could explain, everything shut off. Lights, TV, Xbox, all gone in an instant. The room was swallowed by darkness so fast, it was like someone flipped reality off. I couldn't even see Finn, who was only a few feet away. I scrambled to find my phone, clicked on the flashlight, and the two of us stood there in stunned silence. "Maybe it's the storm," I said, though I hadn't noticed any bad weather earlier. Finn wasn't convinced. I heard something, like footsteps, downstairs. We waited, straining to hear anything. Nothing but the faint whisper of wind outside. We finally decided to investigate. With our phone flashlights guiding us, we crept downstairs. Sure enough, the wind was blowing harder than I'd realized, hissing through the windows. "Weird timing for the power to cut," I mumbled. Neither of us really knew what we were doing. I remembered there was a breaker box in the basement, so we figured we'd check it out. Maybe something had tripped. As we approached the back of the house, I noticed the basement door was already open. That made me freeze. No one ever goes down there. It's unfinished, cold, dusty. The only time anyone used it was to pull out holiday decorations or old storage. But maybe my parents had grabbed luggage before they left? Still, it felt wrong. Finn led the way. Each step down the wooden stairs creaked under our weight. The basement was like a narrow tunnel, concrete walls, scattered boxes, and dead silence. Our flashlights barely cut through the dark. We reached the electrical panel. Its cover was hanging half open, like someone had already been messing with it. Finn studied it for a second, then reached for the main breaker. It was flipped the opposite way from the others. He hesitated, then flipped it. Almost immediately, we heard faint beeps and mechanical hums above us, like appliances rebooting. But the basement stayed dark. We started walking back toward the stairs, the beam of my flashlight bouncing against the walls. And that's when we heard it, a soft shuffling noise. From the far end of the basement. We both stopped cold. I turned the light toward the sound. There, half hidden behind a stack of boxes, was someone. He was tall, thin, hair hanging down over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, couldn't tell if he was staring back. But I knew it was the same man from earlier. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, Finn right behind me. We slammed the basement door shut and bolted out the front door without looking back. Outside, under the street lamp, we finally caught our breath. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. As the operator picked up, I looked at the houses around us. Every single one had lights on, except mine. The man had shut off the power, on purpose. While I was still on the call, I saw movement in my house. Someone passed by the downstairs window. Then a few seconds later, another silhouette moved past an upstairs window in my parents' bedroom. He was walking around, in sight. But after that, nothing. Just silence. When the cops arrived, they went in. He was gone. Vanished, slipped out one of the back windows. Of course, my parents were contacted, and there were a million questions. Police checked everything, but nothing ever came of it. They couldn't identify the guy. No fingerprints, no trace. We never found out who he was or how long he had been watching the house. My parents moved us out of that place within a month. I haven't seen the man since. But sometimes, when the lights flicker or the house creaks in the dark, I wonder if he ever really left. Every few months, I retreat to a secluded little cabin I own deep in the Montana wilderness. No neighbors, no cell towers, no one for miles. Exactly how I like it. The place is completely off-grid electricity unless the gas generator is running. I use it to unwind, to disappear from the world. This trip happened in the fall, when the air bites a little harder and the nights creep in fast. It was a spontaneous decision. I had a 5-day weekend and figured I'd make the 3-hour drive up north. I didn't pack much or plan anything. I just grabbed my gear and went. By the time I arrived, dusk had swallowed most of the forest. The narrow dirt road leading to the cabin was a maze of shadows. I parked, threw my bag inside, then circled around to fire up the generator. The cabin ran entirely on outlets, even the stovetop. I wasn't planning on using much power anyway. I filled the tank, yanked the cord, and the generator coughed to life. Inside, I got the wood stove going to beat back the chill. It drops below freezing out there in autumn, and the cold creeps in fast once the sun disappears. I stayed up for maybe an hour before crashing hard. The next day passed uneventfully. I spent most of it cleaning, sealing up some cracks in the walls, clearing dust, and just settling in. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something strange. A truck rumbling down the forest trail toward the cabin. Out of place. It stopped just short of my clearing. I stayed there for 5 whole minutes, then reversed and drove away without ever pulling in. I figured it was just someone lost or looking for their own place. Nothing worth panicking over. That night, around 10, I stepped out onto the porch to enjoy the fire pit I'd built months earlier. The stars were faint, the trees were still, and the forest was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. I lit the fire, watched the flames dance, and tried to let the silence soak in. But maybe 10 minutes in, the porch light blinked out. Then all the cabin lights followed. The only glow left came from the fire and the faint flicker through the stove window inside. That's when I noticed the generator wasn't running. No hum, no vibrations, just silence. Frustrated, I marched around back, thinking the old thing had conked out. I tried pulling the cord again and again. Nothing. Then I checked the fuel. Empty. I had just filled it the night before. That amount should have lasted days. There were no leaks, no spills, nothing. It didn't make sense, and I didn't have a spare tank. It wasn't the end of the world. I still had the wood stove for warmth and my flashlight, but something about it felt off. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. I sat back down, trying to relax, but my eyes kept scanning the tree line. That's when I noticed it. Off to the right, just past the trail, a silhouette. Humanoid, but not moving. Just standing there among the trees. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look, but it blended into the darkness so well I started second-guessing what I was seeing. Could have been a trick of the firelight. A tree. A weird shadow. I glanced away for a second. When I looked back, it was gone. I searched the forest with my flashlight for 10 more minutes. Nothing. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't spooked. Something about it didn't sit right. It should have still been there if it was a bush or a rock, but it vanished. After that, I didn't take my eyes off the woods. About half an hour passed. The fire crackled beside me, but the silence outside had twisted into something tense. Then came a sound to my left, crack like a stick snapping underfoot. I turned, and that figure was back. But this time, it wasn't alone. I spotted another, and another, a dozen more dark figures, standing dead still between the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing, facing the cabin, staring. I couldn't move. My body froze, like something primal in me had kicked in. Then instinct took over and I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me. I stood in the dark, behind the door, heart hammering. I wanted to look, to check if they were still there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps, slow, crunching footsteps the back of the cabin. There were several, 6, maybe more. I shut every blind in the front room. They didn't knock, they didn't speak, just boots, slowly moving around the cabin in a tight group. They didn't spread out, they didn't bang on anything. They just surrounded me. Then came the worst part. I heard them step onto the wooden porch, just a few feet from where I stood. No talking, no taunts, no demands, just stillness. Heavy, intentional silence. Like they were waiting. Minutes dragged by. I was terrified they were just going to start smashing windows or kick in the door, but nothing happened. Eventually, I mustered the courage to take a peek. I moved to the window, lifted the blind just enough to see outside. The porch was empty. They were gone. No retreating footsteps. No sound of departure. Just vanished. I didn't wait. I grabbed my car keys and ran. Didn't take my bag. I didn't even put on my boots. I sprinted to the car, heart pounding, praying they weren't waiting for me on the road. But no one followed. I drove through those dark forest trails, expecting to see headlights or shapes in the trees. But the path was clear. I got out. I still own that cabin, but I haven't been back since. I don't know who they were, or why they came. But the silence, the sheer presence of those figures in the woods, it wasn't random. It was a warning. And I'm not sure I want to know what would have happened if I'd opened that door.